So, respected guests, esteemed faculty, dear students, and beloved members of Voices from the Periphery. There are moments in the life of an intellectual community when we have the privilege of welcoming a thinker whose scholarship does not merely interpret history, but interrogates the very ways in which history itself is written, erased, and remembered. Today marks one such rare and precious moment. With the deepest humility and profound gratitude, we welcome Professor Manu Bhagavan, a historian whose works have illuminated the entanglement of power, memory, and human rights in the 20th century, and whose writings have reshaped our understandings of modern India and its place in the world. Professor Bhagwan is Professor of History, Human Rights, and Public Policy at Hunter College and Graduate Center, the City University of New York, where he also serves as Senior Fellow at the Ralph Bunche Institute of International Studies. He is the biographer of Madame Vijaya Lakshmi Pandit, India's greatest diplomat and one of the most important women of 20th century, a monumental work forthcoming from Columbia University Press in 2025 and already published by Allen India in 2023. In addition, he is the author or editor of numerous other books, including the critically acclaimed The Peacemakers, India and the Quest for the World, Palgrave Macmillan, 2013, HarperCollins India, 2012, and India and the Cold War, University of North Carolina Press, Penguin, and Viking India, 2019. Beyond the academy, Professor Bhagwan appears regularly in the media to comment on pressing issues of global affairs, bringing his historical insight to contemporary debates. For those of us striving to understand how lives, especially marginalized and forgotten ones, are written into or written out of history, Professor Bhagwan's scholarship is indispensable. He reminds us that archives are never neutral, that silence itself, it is a form of power, and that the task of the historian is not only to recover voices, but also to reckon with the structures that have muted them. Today, we are especially honored to hear him on the theme Forensic History, Erasure, and the Writing of Women's Biography on Vijayalakshmi Pandit. In this lecture, Professor Bhagwan turns his critically lens to the life of one of the most remarkable women of the 20th century while confronting the larger methodological question of how women's lives are remembered, erased, and reconstructed in historical writings. This theme speaks urgently to our times, when questions of gender, representation, and historical justice demand renewed critical attention. On behalf of Voices from Periphery, we extend our heartfelt gratitude to Professor Bhagwan for being with us today. For us, his presence is not merely that of a distinguished historian, but of a thinker who insists that the writing of history is inseparable from the pursuit of justice, and that to confront erasure is itself an ethical and political act. With reverence, admiration, and highest respect, we welcome you, Professor Manu.
Gosh, that was quite the introduction. Thank you so much, Palab, for that very generous set of comments. Good morning from New York, and good evening in India, or good afternoon, wherever you might be logging in. I'm honored to be speaking at the Voices from the Periphery Forum about Vijayalakshmi Pandit and the writing of women's biography. I'm so grateful to Palab Bairagya and the entire Voices team for inviting my participation. Now, more than ever, the work that all of you do here is so important, vital not only to our understanding of our collective past and presence, but to the imagination of a better, more just, more sustainable future for all, and the insistence on the moral urgency of its necessity. This event is also made possible by those in the background offering various forms of support and assistance, and I want to acknowledge their efforts and extend thanks to them as well. Now, I've been asked to speak for about 25 minutes, after which I look forward to having a constructive conversation with all of you. My topic is on forensic history, or what it means to reconstruct and write women's biography, even one as seemingly well recognizable as Vijayalakshmi Pandit. Now, I have to play around with some technical things here for a minute. Palab, if it's okay, I'm going to share my screen.
Okay. Yes, sir. Yes, sure.
I think it should work. Just give me 1 second, okay? Oh, hang on. Wait, it didn't work. Wait, no, that didn't work. Hang on a second. Representing, share your entire screen or browser can cause an infinity mirror. Okay, hang on a second. Something is not working. Palab, I need to be able to share just a window, not the screen. Can I do that?
Yes, sir. Share the windows and also there's
Oh, I got it.
Yeah.
Okay. There we go. Okay, seated on a dais, two figures lean into one another. At camera right sits Mahatma Gandhi, bespectacled, Spartan in his loincloth, holding some sheaves of paper. On the left is his protege and formal successor, Jawaharlal Nehru. Debonair in his starch white shirt and cap and homespun coarse cotton vest with mandarin collar, he holds a pair of half-folded glasses. The faces of both men are relaxed as they share an intimate moment, a private quip, their heads ever so tilted towards one another. They laugh. This picture was captured by renowned Associated Press photographer Max Desfer at the All India Congress Committee meeting in Bombay on the 6th of July, 1946. This multi-layered image spoke so much about these two men, their charisma, their shared chemistry, their close bond, their mutual admiration, their different personal choices. And it also captured the idea of the new India about to be made free from the long period of colonial rule. It caught people's imagination and became a defining photograph. So I was stunned a few years ago to find the original framed so differently. In this, the camera takes a much wider angle. The V between the two tilting heads is now not the center of the image at all, but rather off to the top right. Nehru sits in the middle of the image, and to his left is Vijayalakshmi Pandit. Radiant in an all-white homespun sari with a sleeveless blouse, she glances off to the side with a knowing smirk on her face. There were three who were part of that moment, but she was sliced right out of it, erased from the public memory of that moment, and thus from the history of it altogether. I have reflected on this photograph and its reproduction over several years, using the original for the cover of my previous book, The Peacemakers. All three of the figures were important to my narrative, but then it was Nehru who was at the center of it. The photo captured this perfectly. When Max Desfer passed away at 104 in 2019, the AP featured the original photograph, the one that included Madame Pandit, as she was widely known, in the obituary carried by newspapers all over the world. The true story was now there for all to see. But Vijayalakshmi Pandit's previous excision was not accidental. It was rather a purposeful act of exclusion, a knowing omission that purged her from the narrative, as part of a much more systemic deletion of women from the realms of achievement and action. As I looked into this a bit more, I soon discovered that Madame Pandit and her life seemed to hold many secrets. The story is quite a bit different than what is known. There's another version of that Desfer photograph, taken by someone else, that I have only once had a glimpse of. This is true. In this version, Nehru is slanted more towards his sister. She is leaning in. Her face is wide and bright, and she is looking directly at her brother and the Mahatma. Her mouth is open in a toothy grin, and there's a new possibility. She isn't simply amusedly listening in. She's telling the joke. This episode marks the point of departure for my study, both for how it began and ultimately what it has proved to be about. Several years ago, a colleague stopped by my office to offer me a copy of a book he had just published on the United States and world affairs. He thought this would be of particular interest to me because it featured Madame Pandit. I was embarrassed to realize, once I even figured out that he meant Vijayalakshmi Pandit, that I did not know anything about her, other than the fact that she was Nehru's sister. The embarrassment prompted me to look into it further, and I soon discovered that there was not all that much written about her at all. She was not much more than a footnote in most accounts, just as reflected in the edited version of Desfer's photograph. Yet my colleague's book suggested there was more to it. This set me on a journey that eventually book The Peacemakers. As I wrote it, I was struck by her big personality and rather wondrous accomplishments. She seemed to leap right out of the page whenever she appeared. Years later, when I was in the middle of a new and entirely different project, I found my mind regularly wandering back to her story. I felt I was missing something, that I'd only scratched the surface and that something much larger was waiting. I shared this with my partner one day and added that what I really wanted to do was to write Vijayalakshmi Pandit's biography for Penguin. She nodded in sympathy and told me, get back to work. A few weeks later, I received a message from an editor at Penguin India inviting me to write this very book. I took this as a cosmic sign, and here we are. So this is how I came to write about Vijayalakshmi Pandit. But who exactly was she? The first woman cabinet minister in the British Empire to hold substantial portfolios, president of the All India Women's Conference, India's first ambassador to the United Nations, India's first ambassador to the Soviet Union, member of India's Constituent Assembly, the first woman ambassador to the United States, the first woman president of the UN General Assembly, High Commissioner to the United Kingdom and Ireland, and the first woman ambassador High Commissioner to the United Kingdom, and additional appointments to Spain and Mexico, elected member of Parliament. Well, this, of course, is but a list of titles. And while they immediately underscore the pioneering nature of her work, they do not, in fact, tell us much about who she was. What exactly did she do? Answering this question is where things get interesting, and in a sense, overwhelming, for she seemed to be involved with everything, everywhere, all at once, to borrow a phrase. For instance, she had audiences with British royalty right from a young age and grew quite close to members of the British aristocracy, even as she challenged the might of the British Empire alongside Mahatma Gandhi and went to prison several times for her efforts. She was detained for the attempted assassination of Benito Mussolini in the 1920s. She stayed next door to Lord Runciman, Britain's lead negotiator in Czechoslovakia during the Sudeten crisis. She was outside 10 Downing Street when Chamberlain declared peace for our time. To headlines, she bashed appeasement and warned of the dangers of fascism in Britain the day before Winston Churchill made his famous remarks to Parliament. She worked with Margaret Sanger, Alexandra Kollontai, Golda Meir, and Madame Chang at various times. Raphael Lemkin turned to her for help in establishing the Genocide Convention. She engaged with everyone from Mao Zedong and Charles de Gaulle to Francisco Franco, Konrad Adenauer, and Kwame Nkrumah. She showed up for Dorothy Kenyon when the American judge, an inspiration to American Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg, colloquially known as RBG, was targeted by Senator Joseph McCarthy. Marlon Brando, at the peak of his fame, named her the woman he admired most in the world. Robert Oppenheimer, recently profiled in a big-budget Hollywood movie, asked for her assistance in preventing nuclear disaster. She told President John F. Kennedy not to go to Dallas. And the list goes on. But with this rudimentary understanding of the magnitude of her reach, I would like to focus the remainder of my time with a reading from my book, with two readings from my book, that I hope will illustrate her major contributions to intellectual thought and international affairs. As one of India's best-known faces abroad for many decades, she wielded considerable influence with plenty of latitude to act according to her own judgment. She held official positions and was an emissary of her government, and thus whatever she said or did had to broadly fit into their policies. And from independence, she had to follow the parameters set by the foreign minister and prime minister, both in these cases being the same person, her brother Jawaharlal Nehru. So whatever positions she embraced and advocated, with one major exception when she served as UN General Assembly President, must be seen as part of the overall foreign policy framework of India. But how exactly did that framework emerge? Pandit was a prolific writer, but her book-length works were experiential in nature. What happened when she was a minister, her days in prison during the 1940s, and a memoir of the broad sweep of her life. She did not write treatises on foreign policy, international relations, or philosophy, but she did write many letters and speeches on these subjects, enough to fill volumes, and therein, in various ways, large and small, explicated a meaningful and coherent worldview, independently evolved, eclectic, and cosmopolitan. At times, this put her at odds with Gandhi and Nehru, though in dialogical rather than oppositional terms. The takeaway is that Vijayalakshmi Pandit, in heretofore largely unacknowledged ways, played a role in the world of ideas as much as in the world of action. Much as we can now see that contributed to the financial well-being of the family, letters, conversations, and the like must be seen as critical contributions to the larger narrative. Jawaharlal Nehru is often credited with shaping independent India's ideas and for providing the most detailed understanding of international affairs in his country, often in deeply insightful, lengthy books. While this remains true, I think Vijayalakshmi Pandit's contributions, and indeed those of many other women, have simply not been properly acknowledged, nor fully explored, on account both of their gender and in part derivative of that, the manner and fora in which they expressed their ideas. Many pioneering scholars, of course, have been trying to tell us this for decades. I hope my work, possible only on account of the insistent voices that have come before, will lend itself to a louder correction of such absences. By the late 1930s, Vijayalakshmi Pandit had been elected to the UP Legislative Assembly and had been named the first woman cabinet minister in India, and the first in the British Empire to hold serious portfolios. Just under 2 years into the job, she wrote a short collection of essays reflecting on what she had learned. She pointed out that, quote, a myth has persisted that, in spite of parda and other social handicaps, the Indian woman was the real power inside the home. This is, in my opinion, she's saying, an entirely wrong representation of the case, and is the argument used by those men whom, though outwardly educated, have not been able to uproot from their minds the inherited superstition and tradition of ages, end quote. She opened her critique to talk about systemic issues and lacerated patriarchal norms in the process. Woman, she chided, must not try to see things as they are or give expression to the urges within her. Men and the women they have mesmerized beg woman not to throw away her modesty and become unsexed and shameless. They entreat her in the name of India's past glory not to discard those virtues which, it is said, made the woman of a past age great. What these people really wish to preserve, she bemusedly pointed out, is neither virtue nor chastity, but the ignorance which has kept woman enslaved through the ages and which is now giving place to the light of knowledge. Once that light spreads, no power can prevent its reaching women, and they will take off all restraint and fear and go eagerly forward with men to establish a better order of things. End quote. Then turning personal, she slammed male journalists for focusing on her clothes and style while taking her brother, Jawaharlal Nehru, much more seriously. She said, "What straight, clear, and intelligent questions are put to him? And yet I, who also attempt to do public work, am treated as if my interests were confined to clothes and children and those petty social activities in which the lady of means and leisure engages in order to allay the prickings of her conscience." The awareness of self and societal conscription here foreshadowed the longer trajectory of her own narrative, as illustrated in the Max Desfer photo with which I started. Nevertheless, she persisted. And in her day, Vijayalakshmi Pandit broke through and shattered numerous glass ceilings. To illustrate, I'll read a brief excerpt here from a critical moment that occurred in late 1946. Nan, this is a nickname that she uses her whole life. Nan landed at LaGuardia Field to clear skies and pleasant fall weather early in the day in mid-October. So sorry, I'm reading a brief excerpt from my work now. Fall weather Nan landed at LaGuardia Field to clear skies and pleasant fall weather early in the day in mid-October. Just before her departure, she had broadcast her analysis of the South African situation and its ramifications and foreshadowed the case she hoped to make in New York. The setup for this is that there's a law that's gone into effect in South Africa that is going to hamper the way Indians are treated. And she's been sent off to the United Nations to try to stop these kinds of discriminatory practices from taking place. A little more than a year ago, she said, the Organization of the United Nations came into existence to reaffirm faith in fundamental human rights, in the dignity and worth of the human person, and in the equal rights of men and women and of nations large and small. And the world, grown weary with much bloodshed and suffering, turned hopeful eyes towards the new organization, she began, citing the preamble to the UNO's charter. Today, fundamental rights, so recently promised to the peoples of the world, are being denied to Indians living in South Africa, thus raising a question of moral and human issues, which contains the gravest implications for the future peace and progress of the world, she continued. In fighting for those who share this denial of human rights and who suffer under foreign control, India stands for equality between peoples and for the independence of all colonial areas. We believe that an enduring peace cannot be achieved so long as there is discrimination against one race by another. The Indian case in South Africa becomes, therefore, a test case not only on the question of human rights, but also for the purposes of principles of the Charter itself, she concluded. Later, Nan was the featured speaker at a meeting of the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, or the NAACP in the United States, at a jazz club in Harlem in New York City. 1,000 people were in attendance. Walter White, the secretary of the NAACP, introduced her as one of the two, quote, greatest women in the world, along with Eleanor Roosevelt. The separation of the peoples of the world through suspicion and hatred, a condition far worse than war, now threatened peaceful human coexistence, she declared. She called for action to match the beautiful words now being heard at the United Nations. There is only one problem in the world today, of which all others are merely a part, she said. The name of that problem is the denial of justice. People are being told that they must wait for one thing or another because of the many problems first, but they cannot wait. The time has come when the colored peoples of the world must stand up and claim what is our own. The plenary session of the General Assembly was scheduled for the evening of 7th December in Flushing Meadows in Queens, an outer borough of New York City. At last, it was time. Jan Smuts came to the podium, Jan Smuts representing his country, South Africa, came to the podium and defended his country, charging that it would be monstrous for the UN to condemn a member state. He expressed sympathy with the Indian position, but resolutely stuck to his claim that there were thorny legal questions involved and that the matter thus had to be sent to the International Court of Justice for adjudication. When he was finished, former Solicitor General of the United States, Charles Fahey, leapt up to endorse the South African position, saying that it was eminently proper for the World Court to weigh in. Then Nan, elegant and commanding in a black silk sari, strode down the aisle and onto the stage. It is too late now to argue that fundamental violations of the Charter are matters of domestic jurisdiction of member states, she began. If this was the case, the Charter would be a dead letter, and our professions about a world free from inequalities of race, free from want, and free from fear are empty mockery. I want to carry the Assembly with me in these matters, which, I submit, are common ground. We are trustees of the future, architects of the new world. Forces and feelings which move the minds of men are often more far-reaching in their effects than material forces. We must create for the United Nations the abounding confidence of the common people in it as the defender of justice, public law, and morality. This is what I ask you to do. She had spoken for about 15 minutes. As she turned to make her way back to her seat, the Assembly roared its approval with loud and prolonged applause, and one of the warmest ovations ever accorded a speaker at any of the international organization's sessions. All sound went out of the room as the votes started to roll in around 2 a.m., as everyone held their breath. But the verdict was soon clear. The Indians had triumphed. Nayanthara, her daughter, leapt up from her chair and ran over to her mother, who was still seated at the delegation table. She gave her a joyful kiss, which suddenly could be heard in the entire chamber as it was picked up by Nan's live microphone. It was just the spark the crowd needed. The hall broke into tremendous applause. People from all over the room swarmed forward to congratulate Madame Pandit on her great, hard-won victory over racial discrimination. Emotional delegates started crying for joy, jumping on desks and embracing one another. Heaton Nichols, a South African representative who had tangled with her in committees, looked on glumly from his seat as admirers followed Nan into the lounge next door. Nayanthara covered her mother in kisses again. The black press and race justice activists savored the defeat dealt to white supremacy. The New York Amsterdam News wondered on its front page how South Africa would save themselves from isolation in one world now that they had been handed such a humiliating setback. The paper noted that all comers, even the deceptive and hypocritical Sir Hartley Shawcross of Nuremberg trial fame and Charles Fahey, mentioned earlier, were no match for the brilliant and silver-tongued oratory of Vijayalakshmi Pandit. The paper called the victory "One for Our Side" in an editorial, evocatively writing that racial Jim Crow, a term referencing segregation in the United States, had been blasted as out of line. They celebrated the stand that the diminutive and charming Indian delegate, who they noted had broadly identified herself with the struggle of all colored peoples against discrimination, had taken against the full battery of American arrogance, English chicanery, and their bootlicking stooges. It now remains for us, they wrote, and for all who believe in one world, to work that first step out to its fuller conclusion of justice for all men everywhere. The Atlanta Daily World headlined a front-page story, Madame Pandit leads fight for minorities, and noted that she was also urging Negro unity for independence. Writing in the Chicago Defender, W.E.B. Du Bois, the greatest African-American intellectual alive at the time, declared that every Negro organization in the United States ought to send an official note of thanks to Madame Vijaya Lakshmi Pandit, adding that she should be known to all persons of African descent as the leader of the successful assault upon the color line. He observed that she had not confined her attack to the Indian problem. Rather, she repeatedly spoke of the situation of the natives and the disabilities under which they labor. He praised her for her unselfish and courageous attitude and wrote that he hoped that it would spur solidarity and a more united front against racial injustice everywhere moving forward. That's the end of that excerpt. The result of Vijayalakshmi Pandit's actions were of enduring consequence, for it is this moment that established the precedent that state sovereignty was not, and could not be, impregnable. No state could hide behind the principle of domestic jurisdiction to violate principles of human dignity and equality. And thus, it was this moment that established the precedent for international human rights norms and laws, as UN Assistant Secretary General Henri Laugier noted when he opened the Human Rights Commission several weeks later. And Vijayalakshmi Pandit herself was clear from the outset, building on her work from earlier in the decade, that this was, in fact, her intent. Vijayalakshmi Pandit, we can conclude, made critical contributions to the post-war order in theory and practice, sometimes in direct ways and other times in complementary fashion. She not only helped develop India's core foreign policy objectives in conjunction with other women, she also helped establish one of the key principles of the international in the modern world, that the international community has a role to play in ensuring the basic protection of people everywhere. Her abilities helped her triumph over the world's greatest legal minds, and her achievements and overall consistency of position made her the leader of choice for the world's most distinguished scientists and philosophers. Yet this moment, as significant as it was only the start of her globe-trotting career, her accomplishments multiplying over the years at a dizzying pace. Nonetheless, today she remains largely forgotten, reduced to the margins. This, I submit, has been the result of long-standing gender bias in professional history writing. But additionally, at the end of her long life, when India needed her, Vijayalakshmi Pandit came out of retirement to battle the Prime Minister of India, Indira Gandhi, over her emergency assault on the country's democracy. Pandit helped lead the charge against her niece and campaigned vigorously against her, ultimately helping the opposition to triumph. While Pandit maintained that none of this was personal, Mrs. Gandhi was not one to forget a slight. When she returned to power in 1980, she actively had her aunt erased from the record, scrubbing her out of public memory almost entirely, leaving only a caricature of a villain from the Prime Minister's childhood who had antagonized her mother and berated her throughout her life. Despite Mrs. Gandhi's best efforts, though, as well as the problems of existing historical records, traces of truth have remained. My work sifted through tens of thousands of documents, Vijayalakshmi Pandit's own, of course, as well as the papers of many other individuals. I interviewed numerous individuals who had direct contact with her and tracked down the smallest details across continents. This composite archive helped me to reconstruct a detailed portrait of a political force of nature. Yet some gaps remained, for no archive is ever truly complete, however thorough it might be, as Pallab mentioned in his initial remarks. But I found these gaps to be just as significant as the other material, for it is in those silences that we can also let ambiguity, an essential element of everyday life, live in narrative. So there's two parts to the silence. One is the power of the silences, that they're purposeful, that they exist for a reason, and we want to excavate that and understand the power of those silences. But it also sometimes is purposeful for a very different reason, because of an intent to the complexity of a situation where there is no clear-cut answer. So today we are witness to the active erasure of ideas, histories, and sometimes of whole communities in politically motivated and coordinated actions in many parts of the world. This epistemic violence seeks to forcibly rewire the way we see the world and how we define right and wrong. The story of Vijayalakshmi Pandit and the writing of her biography suggests that ultimately such a course will be limited by its hubris. But this also means the act of collecting and recording the stories of the marginalized is now more urgent and vital than ever. This is our shared obligation, and we must get back to work. Thank you for listening, and I look forward to our conversation.
Okay, so just one second, please. Yeah. So thank you, Professor Bhagavan, for that truly remarkable lecture. Your words have not only introduced us to the extraordinary life of Vijayalakshmi Pandit, but have also unveiled the challenges that confront one attempting to write women's history, in showing us how the archive itself can become a site of exclusion. You have reminded us that the historian's task is not only to narrate lives, but to interrogate the very structures that decide which lives are remembered and which are forgotten. You have shown us that biography is never a neutral exercise. It is a struggle against absence, against distortion, and against the quiet violences of erasure. Yet, at the same time, you have illuminated how biography, when written with rigor and courage, can become an act of recovery and resistance, a way of restoring women like Vijayalakshmi Pandit to the rightful place they deserve in the histories of India and the world. For all of us gathered here, your lecture has been more than a window into a single life. It has been an invitation to rethink how women's experiences, voices, and contributions are woven into or excised from the grand narratives of history. It is also a reminder that in confronting erasure, we are engaging in an ethical and political act, one that insists on justice, memory, and dignity. With these reflections in mind, let us now open the space for questions and dialogue so that we may continue this conversation with you, Professor Bhagavan, and further explore the insights your scholarship and your new book have so powerfully offered us.
Thank you.
Yeah, ma'am, sure.
Thank you so much, sir, for the lecture. It was especially useful for me because I am a doctoral fellow in St. Xavier's College in Kolkata, and I am working on autobiographies of women, Bengali women of the 20th century. And these women, they were part of the nationalist movement. And so your lecture was, it was resonating very, in a very big way with me. So thank you so much. I just wanted to hear your observation on something that post your lecture that just comes to my mind. Because Vijayalakshmi Pandit was one of the really very prominent elite women in the entire milieu of the political sphere of that time. So she being so prominent, having contributed in such a large way globally, I mean, the fact that she came from such an elite background that itself must have opened up the doors for her to be present in so many forums. So and there are so many other women, for instance, the women who contributed to the drafting of the Constitution, whose names were completely erased from history. They never found mention anywhere in mainstream history. But Vijayalakshmi Pandit, being who she was, she still, I mean, with your work, which I understand it's very important. But would you agree that even erasures have their spectrum, in the sense that not everybody is erased in the same way? There is still space for marginalization in different ways. So would you agree to that?
Undoubtedly. I mean, this is sort of unquestionably so. So let's just take different elements of your question at a time. Firstly, was Vijayalakshmi Pandit an elite woman? I mean, she was probably one of the most elite women, not only in India, but in the world. I mean, yes. She was moving in the really stratospheric circles. She's European aristocracy, and even the British monarchs themselves are like paying attention to her when she's a child. That's her circle. And in India, she's, the Maharajas and so on is clearly the kind of people that she initially hangs out with. Now, there's a big transition, and she sort of breaks from that, and much of her work is devoted ultimately to dealing with ordinary people and the poor and the marginalized, and she sort of, that's how she makes her name initially, because she cares and sympathizes and then is to build policy around their needs. So the first is, yes, she's coming from that background. Yes, that background is unquestionably what helps shape her, opens doors, and places her in certain contexts, including the connections with her family and the entire circle of people that she knows. It is therefore also unquestionably true, and this is just stating the obvious, that people without that background do not have that kind of access and have a much more difficult time breaking through into those kinds of areas. That doesn't mean that they don't. It's just that they have a much harder time, and it's rare. It also means that for non-elite women, or women who are not elite as her even, the kinds of contributions that they make, while some of them may also be extraordinary at that level, but they are also going to be just as important and vital, but in very different ways related to everyday contributions or norms or all kinds of things. And reconstructing that is a much greater challenge. We've seen some efforts to grapple with this through subaltern studies as sort of a professional field, which is grappling with this. And I think the writing of narratives of women from different class backgrounds is just as vital, because we want to show that there's this tremendous variety of experience, and we want to show, I think, the clear differences that class can play, even within a category such as "quote unquote" erased women. So yes, I agree with you completely. I mean, you're spot on, and I think that the work that you said that you were doing sounds incredibly important and exciting, and I wish you really well with it.
Thank you so much.
I'd love to hear more, by the way, like what exactly you're doing with the project. But sure.
I've just started out, sir. It's the PhD program, and I'm looking at the women who were involved in the resistance movement. So especially the Bengali women who were part of the resistance during 1930s. So some of them who were called the revolutionaries. That is the set that I'm really looking at, and their autobiographies. So that is what I'm working on. And so that is
where are you getting the autobiographies from?
They are available. So some of them have gone out of print. Some of them I recovered from Internet Archive, and then now I'm really running around, going to National Library to see if it's still in print. They are not. So I've got a list, but I've not been able to get hold of all of them. So I'm still groping around. So recovery is, yes, one of the attempts that I'll make to recover some of these texts.
And the fact that they have written autobiographies sets them apart in some way too, I suspect, right? That they must be literate and so on.
And what strikes me when I read the autobiographies is that they are so conscious of the fact that they have made an important contribution. And the very fact that they wrote these autobiographies, there were about 5 or 6 of them. The Chittagong Armory raid, one of them was involved in. They themselves, when I read the autobiographies, I understand that they are very conscious of the fact that they need to do this work, to take up this work of writing, so that they are not erased, because somewhere that works within their mind, that whatever they have contributed in whatever way they could would be erased if it's not written. So that was possibly one of the reasons why they took up this project of writing. And that comes across very clearly.
I see. That sounds like pretty important, because there's a self-awareness to it, but there's a self-awareness not only of their own contribution, but of the larger sort of systemic processes.
Yes.
Good.
Yes.
Well, I wish you good luck with it.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you so much. And I really enjoyed the lecture, and I hope to get hold of a copy of your book and read it, because it's very relevant to the work that I'm doing.
Thank you so much. And thank you for coming.
Pleasure, sir.
Okay, sir. So, can we proceed to the question answer session from our YouTube, sir? Hello.
I'm sorry, I couldn't understand what you said.
Okay. May I proceed to our question answer session from YouTube, sir? Actually.
Sure. Yes, sir.
Okay.
Sure.
So, one question is from my friend Ayush. He is asking that your lecture emphasizes the erasures and silences in historical records. How can historians reconcile the tension between the archival record as a site of authority and the ethical imperative to recover marginalized voices, especially when the very absence of documentation shapes the narratives we construct? To what extent does reliance on archivals inherently reproduce the power structures you seek to critique? I can type this question in chat box, sir, also. If you...
You're welcome to do it. I understood you.
Okay.
I understood you. Yeah.
Okay.
The question was about how we reproduce narratives, how we write histories, considering the limitations or the inherent power structures of archives, and if we rely on archives, does that not end up reproducing power structures, the very power structures that are embedded in the archives? So how is it possible to create real or authentic historical narrative, broadly speaking, but also ones that specifically pay attention to the marginalized and their voices? So I think that is a terrific question. And a variety of scholars who work with or on archives as a specific site of inquiry themselves, I think grapple with precisely this question. So for my part, I'm just going to speak experientially here, because I think that there's quite a bit of theory on this as well. But let's just start with the point that you're correct, that every archive is fundamentally and inherently limited, and that there are going to be sets of limitations and biases within documents or within the collection as a whole inherently. So one of the tasks, I think, is to be very aware of that and to kind of approach each thing that we encounter, not necessarily with suspicion, but with awareness, so that we can properly contextualize them. This is coming from such and such a person, or this is such and such a organization that is producing these documents. They have an intent. This is the kind of perspective that they're bringing, or this is their intent. We also want to be as fair as we can to see if individuals or even in sub-institutions might break away from assumptions that we might have. And that does happen. The other thing, though, that I think is very important is when I was doing this work, I definitely encountered precisely what you were saying. So I went to find all kinds of other sources. Some of those would from other locations, other voices. For instance, I tried to search for voices that were specifically critical of Vijaya Lakshmi Pandit. There weren't very many, but I wanted to make sure that wherever they were, I found them. I took their thoughts into account. That's just one example. But the point is that just because a document exists in an archive or because someone records it a certain way does not necessarily mean that it's 100% accurate or that it's accurate at all. That's why you want to have multiple tiers and layers to these things. Now, if your follow-up question is, but all documents and all archives are the purview of the privileged, and therefore they don't become sites for the recovery of those who don't participate in those spheres. I would agree at a broad level, but I think I've also been surprised at the kind of range of kinds of records that exist. Now, we don't always have to think of them as formal government documents, and I think this is the key thing. That's the title of my talk is Forensic History. So if you think of forensics, or you think, just imagine for a moment, and this is a terrible example in general, but it helps us to understand a crime scene. If you think for a moment of a crime scene, and you think that the criminal, maybe this isn't such a terrible example. If you think the criminal has gotten away with it, and if you want for a minute to think of this as powerful people in history kind of saying, this is what happened, and trying to warp reality so that we only remember what they say happened. So in the same way that a criminal hopes to wipe what they do and pretend it didn't happen, through the power of forensics, nonetheless, there are always traces. And it is possible to put this together and to get at least partial pictures of some of what happened. And so this doesn't necessarily mean archives as sites of documents. Archives can be environmental changes. They can be geological in nature. They can involve material remnants like elements of homes, fabrics, et cetera. All of these things can tell us bits and pieces of stories, and then we have to figure out where those threads fit together so that we can weave the larger tapestry back. None of this is easy, and it requires tremendous methodological sophistication to anticipate and prevent manipulation. So there's a lot to it, and it isn't something that I think there are many of these. I think these days armchair experts armed with WhatsApp and whatever are particularly capable of pursuing. It doesn't mean that they can't, but they just haven't received, or they haven't prepared themselves for all that kind of training. They might be able to. I think anyone can, but they just need to sort of dig down into this in a more thorough way. So that's my answer.
Okay. Another question is from Shubhadeep. He is asking, the notion of forensic history suggests a methodical, evidence-driven reconstruction of lives. Yet all historical writing is interpretive. How do you navigate the balance between forensic rigor and interpretive imagination without imposing prescriptive ethical or political frameworks onto the subject's life, particularly in the case of a figure as public and politicized as Vijaya Lakshmi Pandit?
Okay, this is wow, these are great questions. These are really good questions. This is an engagement with the broader idea of empiricism, and there are many critiques of empiricists and empirical histories. I think in my younger days, I did dabble with theory and theoretical models, but I think ultimately I've landed on being an empirical historian. Well, still having an interest in theory as well, of course. But how to answer this, which I think is terrific, and a very aware kind of question again. I think the answer lies in the way the question was framed, which is there's always, so the kind of book that I've written tells a story, and the story that I tell, I think without question, all narrative holds an interpretive framework. We're using material and interpreting them. And so we want, this again is stuff that's been talked about in the literature for quite a while now, that we want to be aware of our own subjectivity. And we want to kind of be critical of notions of false objectivity. There's a level of objectiveness that we bring to things, but at the end of the day, we all have our own perspective, and we have a particular subjectivity that we're going to bring to the work. And that's okay. I don't think that we should be critical about it. I mean, I don't think that we should be defensive about it. We can be critical of it, but we shouldn't be defensive about it. We should be aware that everyone has their own subjectivity that they're going to bring to work. And it's fair game to point out those subjectivities and therefore the limits of those subjectivities. I think the important thing, though, that this highlights is the need for multiple kinds of work. So if someone else wants to write a very different kind of work about Vijaya Lakshmi Pandit, I think that's great, and I think that they should. And that might tell us something very different than what I've been able to do, because their view or their perspective is going to be different. What I tried here, and I think if you engage with the book, you'll see to do, is to bring multiple perspectives about her and her life. So as an example, when I found material from people who loved her, I put that in there. Not physically loved her, but who admired her greatly. I put that in there. But when I found material from people who were critical of her, perhaps no one was more critical of her than Krishna Menon, for example. Krishna Menon has a fairly substantive place in the book, and his kind of his engagement with her is seen throughout the narrative, wherever those engagements occur. And I also put a lot of stuff into the notes to highlight where criticisms were coming from or why. And I also made sure to engage with different kinds of critiques of her. For example, popularly in India, she's been criticized for things like her spending and things of this sort. So that's all in there, and I engage with all of that as well. But again, I have a range of subjectivities. whatever my intentions or best efforts might be, I still come with this from the perspective of a man. And that's going to create certain kinds of conditions to the work, I think, no matter what I do. And from a positionality, I have a global positionality based in New York, travel around the world. So that kind of perspective is obviously built into the narrative as well. So those are some examples. And then more specifically, you're asking about like the facts that appear in text, such as they are. I think, let me be clear here about this one point though, because in our age, this has become a critical element of the way we engage with one another and with reality, both not just virtually, but in the real world as well. And that is, in my judgment, there are facts. We do know this happened or that didn't happen, or this was the purpose. There are elements of things that we should consider as facts. Everything is not simply up for debate. There are many layers of interpretation of facts, and that's completely okay. But I do think that there are ground realities of facts. This is the basis of science, and I think it should be the structural basis, at least in some way, of some elements of humanities and social science scholarship as well. Because if we can't agree on that element, and I realize that perhaps what I'm saying might seem controversial within certain field perspectives, but I think if we can't agree on that, we allow ourselves to be beholden to the scope of misinformation and disinformation, which we see proliferating at ever greater speeds right now, and which I think is only exponentially going to get worse moving forward with AI and deepfakes and so on. So I think we have to have a commitment to facts at the basis of any interpretation. That's what I'd say.
Thank you so much, sir. The next question is from Rakhi. She is asking, in recovering women's biographies, historians face the dual challenge of overemphasizing exceptional achievements or downplaying systematic constants. How do you ensure that the biography neither mythologizes Pandit's accomplishments nor flattens the gendered realities she navigated, thereby maintaining fidelity to both her agency and the structural forces of patriarchy?
Before I answer this question, what I want is, there's been, I think, 4 or 5 questions so far. And I've been speaking in a variety of fora for decades, and on this particular topic for a year and a half. And I say this honestly now, I have not so far ever encountered questions as incredibly perceptive and intellectually demanding as just the 4 or 5 that have been asked so far. So this is really remarkable, and what an incredible forum you have here of engaged and serious thinkers. So let me just congratulate you and your team at Voices for doing this and for demanding such rigor. Okay, this question is about the challenges presented in reconstructing life narrative and navigating the tensions between mythologizing and flattening the narrative. Let me say that, firstly, there were 3 biographies of Vijayalakshmi Pandit before mine in her own life, and then I think that there were 1 or 2 kind of things that were published thereafter. But the 3 that were published during her life were all written by non-Indians, 2 American journalists and a famous British writer named Vera Brittain. All 3 of them, including Vera Brittain's but there was one by an American man named Robert Hardy Andrews, or Andrews Hardy. I get the last name mixed up a little. But that one is called A Lamp for India. That one is the most egregiously hagiographic. But all three of them kind of veer in that direction and do exactly what you're asking. They kind of mythologize her. And the reviews for the one by the American male journalist, Lamp for India, the criticism was Vijayalakshmi Pandit could kind of do no wrong. She just sort of flitted above all of the catastrophes that were happening around her and kind of just moved from, she bounced around on the clouds, and ultimately there's no tension, there's no real like humanizing of the subject in the work. That was a criticism of that initial biography. So that was something that I was explicitly intent on not doing in this book. You've asked a perceptive question. It was a challenge in writing this because this is a person of incredible accomplishments. And the story is eye-popping. When you get to it, you're just like, this doesn't even seem real, that she's just doing all of these incredible things. And they are incredible. They are remarkable. They are exceptional. They are all of these things. And you want to be very careful, though, of doing that and making her seem superhuman, that is above frailties. And I think when people write what appear to be heroic narratives, and people like Mahatma Gandhi have been subjected to this for forever. And in fact, as Shahid Amin once pointed out, that in his own life, there were rumors that circulated of his superhuman abilities. And that he was more than human, and so on and so forth. When you're grappling with work like this, I think you have to accept exceptionality while also really foraging for the strain that can kind of put on a person in their personal lives and in their physical and mental health. So that is one of the things I deal with in this book. Vijayalakshmi Pandit was not a perfect person in the sense that everything that she did came at a price. And the price was often to her own personal health. She had a number of mental health challenges, which I explicitly go into throughout the book. And she had some physical health challenges as well, which I also get into with as much detail as I can. The other risk of doing this, of course, you don't want to sensationalize anything, including with her personal relationships. And she had some famous ones and some not so famous ones, but controversial ones. So you want to engage with these things. You want to talk about them, but you don't want to kind of overly put them on a platform. And then the second aspect of your question is, how do you not flatten when you are not mythology? You know, how do we walk this line? Essentially, you're pointing out that it's a tightrope, and you want to strike this delicate balance. I'll leave it to you to judge whether or not I've accomplished it very well. I can only tell you what I set out to do, and then I want to just highlight what the way I did it, so that I think is to answer the question. Well, much like what Palabita asked at the very beginning, what Palabita said about her own autobiographies that she's using and working with in her current work, Vijayalakshmi Pandit had a certain self-awareness, which I highlighted in my talk, of what was going on around her, of the way men were treating her, of the way the press was constructing a narrative about her. She called it out many times, actually. And then there was, she was also self-aware enough about it that she started deploying those things. She would play on men's, I think, predatory, patriarchal worldviews, and a sort of play to that on occasion when she wanted to get something done. And then after the fact, she sort of was very open about it. She said, "This is exactly what I did. And I used every tool in my book, and I'm not going to apologize for it because this is what needed to be done." All of that I distilled, and it's all written in the book. And again, I'll leave it to you to judge.
Okay, so another question is from Firoz. He is asking, Pandit's life intersected with both Indian nationalist politics and international diplomacy. How do we account for the erasures that occur not only within national archives but also in global memory systems shaped by Western-centric historiographies? Can a forensic approach expose the ways in which colonial and international frameworks have mediated which women's histories are recorded and celebrated?
I don't want to answer this question too optimistically, but this is one of the areas where I have, if you frame it as national and international and you put them in blocks, the question makes a lot of sense. But I think at the international level, there are so many competing interests. Things don't exist just at the national level. There are numerous non-national organizations, religious groups, sub-ethnic communities, migrant communities. And let us remember, in the context of British colonialism and the British Empire, that there are various other subject populations, migratory colonial populations, and native populations throughout the Western world, as well as in various other parts of the empire. And so when we talk about international memories or international archives, we are not always referencing the standard national colonial point of view that one might imagine. I think that's part of that question. As an example, one of the great sources of information I found came from Black activists and the Black press in the United States. They were subject to American Jim Crow and its previous incarnations dating back to the age of slavery. And they are engaging with and writing about her in a variety of ways. So when we draw on that kind of material, there's going to be a certain perspective, certain set of biases inherent in that, of course, as well. But they're very, very different from what, say, the State Department archives might produce about her. And so I think there's a tremendous amount of nuance in what you're labeling in this question, international archives. And similarly, in the national archives, just as many of us who work on things related to India, not necessarily in an international context, but just let's talk about some aspect of the anti-colonial movement or the imposition of colonialism and its realities in the subcontinent. When we're doing that, we are engaging with material and ideas and archives that exist in multiple registers. We're not just relying on what's found in the National Archives of India or in Teenmurti. We're not just relying on the formal narrative. We're trying to piece together things, and the very fact that we can do that with some difficulty and with limitations, but the fact that we can do it at all, I think it highlights the fact that we want to be careful with overemphasizing categories like the national and the international.
Okay, the last question is from Arnav. He is asking, the forensic historian often treats gaps and silences as diagnostic evidence. But what if these absences are themselves performative or politically strategic? How do you differentiate between erasure, international omission, and the inevitable incompleteness of historical record? And what theoretical framework allows for such a distinction?
Palab, I'm sorry, on this question, you broke up a lot, and so I couldn't hear most of it. Could you repeat, please?
Yes, sir. Pardon me.
Yeah, we're having some interference suddenly, so I was unable to hear you. Could you repeat the question,
I'm so sorry,
please?
sir. I'm so sorry from my side, sir. Yes, I am reading. The question is, the forensic historian often treats gaps and silences as diagnostic evidence. But what if these absences are themselves performative or politically strategic? How do you differentiate between erasure, international omission, and the inevitable incompleteness of historical record? And what theoretical framework allows for such a distinction?
I think the last question is worth thinking about. It. The last part of the question, what theoretical framework allows us to do this, is worth thinking about it. I'm not sure I'm going to have an answer on it. But I will say this. Let's take one element of her story, and this will allow me to kind of deal with this a little bit. So as some or maybe many or all of you know, there is a famous episode with Vijaya Lakshmi Pandit before she was known as Vijaya Lakshmi Pandit, back when she was still called Sarup Nehru, where she fell in love with a gentleman named Syed Hussain. And something happened, and it has sparked many a rumor about this relationship. And the rumors have been deployed for various political causes over many years. So in her memoir, for instance, on this particular element of her story, she says she met and she had a relationship with him and she was interested in him, but then that she kind of elides over the story. Well, we had a relationship and we wanted to, but I was very foolish and young. And, in those days it was more complicated. Now, of course, it's not such a big deal. And she talks about how members of her family have had similar kinds of relationships. But back then it was because she was Hindu, he was Muslim, and it wasn't going to be possible. And so therefore, it just didn't work out. That's how she deals with it. In that she admits that there was something, but she doesn't get into it a lot. For those of you, not for those of you, but within the rumor mill or within WhatsApp history, there's always a focus on a famous book that has some references to this from a person who had a falling out with Nehru but had been very close to him. That says that a file containing all of the details of, quote, her marriage were thrown in the fire and so on and so forth. So I went back to look through things, not just in her memoir, but elsewhere. And the silence on this is amazing. I mean, it really is amazing. There is nothing. Everything everywhere was seemingly wiped clean. And to the extent that there was something, well, it was very difficult to trace, not only because the documents were gone, but seemingly people who were there or their relatives, there were rumors, but they would, even to this day, not talk about it. So how are we going to do this? The first thing came from a book called Mr. and Mrs. Jinnah, which incidentally tracked down a letter that some material that Syed Hussain had sent to Sarojini and Padmaja Naidu, and in the context of that, admitted that there had been a marriage of some kind. And that was one piece. And then there was a biography that came out about Syed Hussain by N.S. Vinod. And in that, he went a little bit further than just using that material. He found some Pakistani journalist claim and something else to again say that there was a marriage, something to this effect. Vinod and I had been in conversation, and at the time that was the extent of what I knew. He pulled some additional things with those journalists material, and that was sort of where things were. And then I was amazed when by complete happenstance, I was at Yale University, which is in New Haven, Connecticut, in the United States. And I was there for some other thing, but I said, "Oh, I'm here. Let me go into their special archives room and see what I can find." And I pulled some files, and quite by serendipity, I landed on some files of very personal notes where a family who knew her were going to produce a little short note, and they started talking about her conversations about the marriage. And there was a marriage. It was so there in black, it was clear as day. It was in black and white. It was, it was written, and this person is recalling it. Now it's secondhand. It's a memory from someone else. But I was very excited because it was the first ever smoking gun that there was, in fact, a marriage. The first ever. I don't think anyone ever had found or published something like that. And then I was kind of going to leave it at that. And then at the last second, honestly, the last second, I was like really close to publication. And one of her granddaughters, with whom I'd had many, many conversations with the family, at kind of at the last second shared a personal letter with me, which was explicit. And it sort of said that, again, she had been married and this had happened, and there we had it. When I put those two things together, I was able to be very definitive about what had happened. It was in her own words. The second letter, the first word was a record of a conversation from a reliable person. So how do we deal with silences? How do we deal with political absences? First, you're right. There is political absence. This story has been wiped out for political reasons and has remained silent to ostensibly protect the family from wild rumor and political cutthroat politics in India, which might be used by people with particular points of view to attack or damage the family, I think was the idea. So one is we observe and call the silence out. It's not that the silence doesn't exist, it's there. And it itself serves a purpose. But then, as I say with forensic history, if there are traces, there are always traces. So we can put together what happened. I had some additional things with Firangi Mahal and so on that I had learned. And I managed to piece much of the story together. I would say even as much as I did, and even with the details that I was able to piece together, there remains gaps. We still don't have every second is not reconstructed. And there's some weird conflicting accounts. There was an officer who provides a memoir and talks about this trip that's made, and the timelines don't exactly meet up. And I just left it that way. I just left it that way. I just say that there are these conflicting accounts and we have to deal with this for now unless something else comes forward. That, again, is the ambiguity that we leave in there because that's what there is in our knowledge, and we have to also be accepting of that. So I would say I'd say that you approach this in a couple of different ways. One is not to be arrogant enough to assume that we are going to be able to figure out the truth of what's in those absences all the time. And the absences are there for a reason, that they speak and that they themselves serve a purpose. I think the bigger thing to do is to kind of often at least, approach those absences with exactly what you're doing. Ask the question, why are they there? What is the purpose of these absences? And what do the absences tell us about the people creating these records? We know, like, for example, with British colonial atrocities related, for instance, to the Mau Mau and other things, tons of absences. And the reason tells us a lot about British colonial officials. It's not just that they wanted to hide it, but that they knew what they were doing was terrible and wrong. Otherwise, why would you erase it? And more, it goes on in detail. So that's, I think, encouraging. That shouldn't be discouraging. That's an element of our forensic toolkit. Even in the absences, even in the wiped clean room, everything tells a story. I'll leave it at that.
Okay, so before we bring today's gathering to a close, I wish to extend on behalf of Voices from the Periphery and everyone present here our most heartfelt gratitude to you, Professor Manu Bhagavan. Your lecture on forensic history, erasure, and the writing of the women's biography on Vijayalakshmi Pandit has been an extraordinary journey into the silences, erasures, and recoveries that shape the writing of history. You have reminded us that biography is never simply the telling of a life. It is also an encounter with absence, with distortion, and with the subtle violences that determine whose stories endure and whose are effaced. By leading us through the life of Vijayalakshmi Pandit, one of the most remarkable women of the 20th century, you have shown us how history is not only made in public speeches and diplomatic triumphs, but also in the contested terrain of archives, memory, and interpretation. You have revealed to us how even the lives of the most visible women can be fragmented, overlooked, or diminished, and how the historian's task becomes one of piecing together fragments with rigor, empathy, and imagination. What you offered us today was more than the biography of an extraordinary figure. It was a profound meditation on method itself. You showed us that to write women's lives is to confront erasure head-on, to read against the grain of archives, and to recognize that silence itself is a form of power. At the same time, you illuminated how historical recovery can be an act of justice, restoring dignity, visibility, and agency to those whom history has tried to silence. Your words remind us that scholarship at its most courageous is not confined to facts alone. It is animated by ethical responsibility, by the insistence that memory must serve justice for us, students, teachers, and seekers alike. Your lecture has been a gift that not only deepens our understanding of India's past, but also sharpens our awareness of the politics of history writing in the present. We lead this gathering not only enlightened, but also charged with responsibility to read more carefully, to question more deeply, and to ensure that our own scholarly practices resist the easy acceptance of erasure. Your presence among us has reminded us that to write history is at its core to make a moral choice, whether to collude with forgetting or to insist on remembrance. From the depths of our hearts, we thank you, Professor Bhagavan, for your generosity, your vision, and the courage with which you confront the silences of history. Though this session now draws to a close, the resonance of your words will remain with us, shaping our scholarship and our classrooms and our imaginations for years to come. With reverence and humility, we bring this gathering to a close, carrying forward the inspiration and responsibility that your lecture has placed upon us. Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone, for coming and what brilliant questions you asked. Thank you, Palab, for everything. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.